Before Atlantis, before the first names of gods were spoken, there was an empire said to shine across the heart of the Pacific. Mu, the lost cradle of humankind. They say its people spoke to stars, built cities of coral light, and vanished beneath waves that never stopped remembering them. This is not just a story of ruins and myths. It is a story of love for the world, of discovery born from silence, of survival carved from the deep. Each whisper of ocean wind, each shimmer of moonlit water, carries an echo of their dream. Can you imagine standing on that last golden shore, watching your world sink beneath the horizon? Would you hold on to what you could carry, or let the sea take everything, even your name? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? And where are you listening from? Gently tap like and subscribe to drift with us through history's hidden tides, where time and myth become one. Now dim your screen, let the air grow still, and listen as the ocean begins to speak. The sea breathes like a living thing. Each wave folds over itself in a slow rhythm, heavy with memory. Beneath it, something older than human time stirs, not in motion, but in silence. The ocean remembers everything it has ever touched. Far below the surface, light slips like pale silk between coral spires and forgotten stones. The colors fade the deeper you go, from turquoise to cobalt, from cobalt to black, until only a soft shimmer remains, as though the water itself is thinking. They say that once a continent lay here, a vast land between the rising sun and the setting moon, a land of gardens and temples where the air hummed with song, and the people knew how to read the rhythm of the tides as one reads poetry. They called it Mu. No map remembers it now, no record bears its name. And yet, when the world grows still, when the surf hushes and the wind pauses mid-breath, there comes a low, resonant sound beneath the water, like a voice murmuring through miles of blue, like a whisper beneath the waves. Long ago, in that golden age of calm seas and endless summer, Mu rose at the heart of the Pacific. Its shores stretched farther than 1,000 islands combined, its forests lush with trees that glowed faintly in moonlight. Rivers of clear mineral water wound through cities built not from stone, but from coral carved smooth as glass. The people of Mu were neither gods nor myths, though stories later made them so. They were dreamers, artisans of balance, who believed that every act of creation was a prayer. When they shaped a wall, they left a hollow space for wind to sing through. When they raised a tower, they aligned it with the stars, so that the night could look back at them. In their language, long since lost, the word for building and the word for breathing were the same. On one quiet evening, when the sky was lavender and the ocean glowed like liquid pearl, an elder named Aruan stood on the cliffs of the western shore. He had lived through 80 harvests of the moon, old enough to see the patterns of the world repeat themselves. He listened, as he always did, to the sound of the water below. It was not just the tide he heard, but something deeper. A pulse within the sea, steady and slow. Children often came to him, curious about what he was listening for. The sea is alive, he would tell them. It remembers what we forget. Tonight, the sound was different, softer, yet heavier. The wind paused, and the seabirds quieted, as if the horizon itself were holding its breath. Aruan placed his hand upon the stone ledge, feeling the faintest vibration beneath it. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, He thought he could almost hear words. Far inland, beyond the shining cities and lotus lakes, the Temple of First Light stood upon a rise of white stone. Its domed roof caught the first rays of every dawn, scattering them across the land in golden arcs. Within its halls, scribes kept careful records, not of kings or wars, but of harmony. They believed history itself was a kind of song, and that when sung wrongly, the world fell out of tune. On that same evening, a young scribe named Lyran dipped her brush into ink made from crushed shells and ocean water. She was copying an ancient hymn, its symbols curling like waves across parchment. Her mentor approached quietly. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "The waves," she said, glancing toward the open archway where night air drifted in. He shook his head. "No, the sea's whisper. It grows louder these days." Lyran smiled faintly, not wanting to show the small tremor in her hands. She had dreamed of the sea often lately, dreams where the ground shifted beneath her, where the stars rippled like reflections on water. But she said nothing. To dream of the ocean was to hear its heart, an honor, the elders said. Still, something about the tone had changed. Beyond Mu's shores, the ocean was calm, its surface smooth as glass. But deep below, a slow movement began, subtle as breath, ancient as the planet's bones, a tremor imperceptible to any but the sea itself. The earth was stirring, and in the villages along the coast, fishermen spoke of odd things: glowing fish, currents running backward, tides that came early and never fully went out. One night, when the moon rose blood red, Arwen walked again to the cliff. The whisper had become a low hum, like distant thunder beneath the sea. He felt it vibrate in his ribs. "Old friend," he said softly to the water, "what are you trying to tell us?" The answer came not in words, but in a sudden stillness. Even the crickets fell silent. Somewhere in the vastness of the Pacific, where today the seafloor spreads for thousands of miles, Mu stood surrounded by light. Its people were watchers of balance, artists of the elements. They did not fear the sea. They were born from it. Their myths said that humanity itself began when the ocean fell in love with the sky, and their children learned to walk between them. But love and balance are fragile things. Even the sea in its beauty can rise. As the stars emerged, old constellations that seemed to shift subtly with each passing year, Lyran stood on the temple's balcony, staring upward. She thought of the symbols she had copied earlier: spirals, waves, circles within circles. The song of balance. "What if," she whispered to herself, "the sea remembers more than we do?" The night breeze stirred her hair. In the distance, the sound of the surf rolled across the land like a heartbeat. A ruin's voice carries softly across time. All things that rise must one day return. The tide moves in both directions. So too does memory. And as if in answer, the whisper beneath the waves deepened, a murmur that could almost be mistaken for words. It seemed to say, "Remember." That night, across the expanse of Mu, people dreamed the same dream. They stood upon their shores as the stars trembled above them. The ocean was no longer still, but alive with light, pulsing, calling. And though dawn would rise as it always did, something unseen had already begun to change. The world was listening again. The whisper beneath the waves grows louder. Morning came softly to Mu. The ocean lay smooth and endless, painted in strokes of rose and gold. The first light spilled across the floating gardens, glimmering on dew that trembled like tiny pearls. Children laughed along the shore, their voices echoing like distant flutes. Fishermen unfurled nets woven from sea silk, thin strands that caught the light as though spun from the sun itself. And high above, in the eastern hills, temples chimed with the soft tones of crystal bells, marking the hour when the world awoke in unison. Every sound, wind through the reeds, oars dipping into water, even the hush of morning waves, blended into a kind of natural symphony. They called it the harmony of Mu. In those days, music was not mere art. It was a form of communication with the elements. Every tone, every rhythm was said to align the soul with the breathing of the world. The people believed that the sea was alive with songs, that beneath the visible waves another ocean existed, one made of sound and memory. Their musicians, known as the Talarin, could listen to those deep harmonies and translate them into melodies played on long, shell-carved instruments. When a Talarin played at dusk, the entire bay would shimmer as though the water itself were responding, rippling in patterns that matched the rhythm. It was said that the ocean and the musician became one listener, and yet, lately, something about that song had changed. One morning, Lyron walked to the great harbour of Anai, where merchants traded shells, salt crystals, and glowing pearls harvested from the inner lagoons. The air smelled of citrus blossoms and warm seaweed. Boats of smooth whitewood drifted in, each decorated with banners that fluttered like wings. A Talarin named Kael was performing at the water's edge, his instrument long and curved like a conch shell. His fingers moved with calm grace, and the notes rose like bubbles through the sunlight. But Lyron noticed something that others did not. The fish beneath the pier were moving in strange, swirling circles, not following the sound as they usually did, but spinning in restless patterns. She watched Kael's brow furrow slightly. He felt it too. When the last note faded, she approached him. "The water doesn't seem to listen anymore," she said softly. Kael turned his gaze toward the horizon. "No," he murmured, "it listens, but it no longer agrees." Later that day, Lyron climbed the narrow path to the Observatory of Winds, a dome of white crystal overlooking the coast. Inside, tall brass spheres turned slowly, reflecting lines of sunlight that danced across the floor. Elders of the Circle of Watchers stood in quiet discussion. Among them was Arwen, his aged form wrapped in sea-blue robes. His eyes, though dimmed with years, still carried that steady light, the kind that had watched many tides come and go. "The waves have shifted," one of the scholars said. "The western currents move against the moon's pull." "The deep tides stir again," another added, "perhaps only briefly, or perhaps not." Arwen rested his hand upon the polished stone table, tracing the carved map of Mu, a vast continent shaped like a rising bird. "The sea gives," he said slowly, "and when it takes, it does not ask permission." Lyron hesitated, then stepped forward. "Master Arwen," she said quietly, "do you believe the whispers mean danger?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "The sea does not speak in warnings, child. It speaks in remembrance." That night, the Talarin gathered at the Temple of First Light for the ceremony of the Deep Tone, performed once each lunar cycle to honour the ocean's breath. The great hall was lit only by floating spheres of pale fire, phosphorescent orbs that drifted through the air like slow-moving stars. Kyle stood among the musicians, his conch instrument gleaming faintly. The first note rose, a deep hum that vibrated through the stone floor, through every chest in the room. The sound grew, layered with harmonies from dozens of players, until the entire temple seemed to breathe with them. The walls shimmered with subtle waves of color, blue fading into gold, gold into violet. It was beautiful. And then, for the first time in living memory, the harmony fractured. A discordant tone split through the air like the cry of a wounded bird. The orbs of light flickered. The musicians froze, their hands trembling. Kyle's instrument had cracked along its spiral seam. A fine line, glimmering like silver lightning, ran across its surface. He looked down at it in disbelief. Silence followed, long, heavy, uncertain. Then Aruan's voice echoed softly through the chamber. The song of the sea is changing. The next morning, storms brewed along the far horizon, dark masses of cloud rolling over the water, though the wind on shore was still. People gathered at the beach, shading their eyes. The clouds pulsed faintly with inner light, as if illuminated from below by the ocean itself. Lyran stood beside Kale. "The sea remembers," she whispered. Kale nodded. But what is it remembering? As days passed, strange phenomena spread. In the northern orchards, fruits ripened weeks too soon. In the southern marshes, birds that normally migrated in pairs arrived alone, circling aimlessly. Fishermen began to find shards of unfamiliar stone in their nets. Smooth, iridescent fragments that hummed faintly when held to the ear, like echoes of distant music. The elders debated endlessly. Some believed these were signs of a natural cycle long forgotten. Others, omens of imbalance. Aruan alone remained calm. "Everything in nature sings," he told his students. "Even its silence is a kind of song. Listen not to what has changed, but to what is being remembered." But even he, when alone, would stand upon the cliffs and stare out at the horizon, and wonder if the sea's memory was awakening too soon. One night, the dreams returned. Every soul in Mu, from the smallest child to the oldest priest, dreamed again of standing on the edge of the world. The stars quivered above them like reflections on water, and a single note hummed through the air, vast and sorrowful. In the dream, the ocean rose slowly, not to destroy, but to embrace. It whispered a word none could quite recall upon waking, a word that sounded like home. When dawn came, the people of Mu found themselves strangely quiet. Birds did not sing that morning. Even the wind seemed to move with caution, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. And somewhere deep beneath the surface, far below the coral towers and glowing reefs, the sea's ancient currents continued to turn. Within the trenches and caverns of the underworld ocean, light flickered between stone monoliths inscribed with patterns long forgotten by human eyes. Each pulse of light matched the rhythm of the Talarin's fractured song. The sea was remembering indeed, not the present Mu, but the Mu that had come before. Lyran stood on the temple steps that evening, watching the sun melt into the horizon. She closed her eyes, hearing that low hum again, the whisper beneath the waves, now joined by another tone, softer, like a harmony forming. For a moment, she could almost believe the ocean was trying to speak through her heartbeat. And somewhere, across the still expanse of water, a faint echo replied, "The sea remembers." Beneath the still waters of Mu's southern bay, where sunlight drifted through layers of turquoise blue, lay the oldest secret of the continent, the coral libraries. They were not libraries in the way we know them. There were no scrolls, no shelves, no written books. Instead, columns of coral rose from the seabed, spiraling upward in delicate lattices, each pattern recording the flow of time itself. When the talarin played their music above the waves, the corals vibrated faintly, absorbing the harmonies as though the sea itself were listening. The people of Mu believed that coral was alive with memory, that every sound, every word spoken near the ocean was captured in its living stone. It was said that if you pressed your ear against a coral pillar on a still night, you could hear the past breathing softly within it. Lyran had always dreamed of seeing the coral libraries. Few were permitted to enter, only scholars of the Order of the Tides, those trained to interpret the language of currents and light. But after the discord at the Temple of First Light, Aruan had summoned her. "The sea is remembering," he told her, "and so must we." Now, dressed in a flowing robe of sea-grey linen, she followed Aruan and two others down a narrow path to the water's edge. The sky was pale with dawn. The waves were calm, their surface glittering with morning light. There, anchored by smooth stones, floated small boats woven from reeds and sealed with wax. The group stepped in and with silent strokes began to row toward the deeper blue. Aruan spoke softly as they went. "The first songs of Mu were written here," he said, "not in ink or voice, but in resonance. The coral holds them still, echoes of every prayer, every storm, every silence." Lyran gazed over the side of the boat. The water grew clearer as they moved outward, until she could see the faint shimmer of the coral towers below, pale pink and silver, spiraling like frozen smoke. Her breath caught. "It's like the ocean grew a cathedral." Aruan smiled faintly. "Perhaps it did." They reached the diving platform, a circular raft tethered to the seabed by ropes. The scholars fitted translucent shells to their faces, the ancient breath lenses of Mu, which allowed one to draw in air filtered through liquid. With a deep inhale, Lyran felt her chest expand with cool, oxygenated water, and then she followed Aruan down into the glow. The descent was slow, serene. Rays of sunlight pierced the surface above them, breaking into shifting ribbons that wove through the water. Small fish, coloured like gems, drifted lazily between coral towers. The silence of the deep was immense, a silence that seemed not empty, but full. When her feet touched the smooth stone of the seabed, Lyran saw them, columns rising in graceful spirals, their surfaces etched with natural patterns so intricate they looked deliberate. Between them, soft currents carried faint pulses of blue light. The coral libraries. Aruan gestured for her to place her hand on the nearest column. She hesitated, then pressed her palm against its cool surface. At once, a faint vibration moved through her skin. Not rough or sharp, but gentle, rhythmic, like a heartbeat far away. "Do you feel it?" Aruan's voice echoed through the water. Lyran nodded slowly. "It's singing." "Yes," said Aruan. "Every coral here carries the song of a moment in time. Each vibration is a memory of something that once was. A storm, a birth, a word whispered to the sea." She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm pass through her. The vibration grew stronger, forming patterns, not random but melodic. Then, faintly, she heard it. A voice. At first, only a hum, then words, soft and distant. "The tide remembers what the stars forget." she gasped, pulling her hand away. The sound faded instantly. Aruan regarded her calmly. You heard them, didn't you? Lyra nodded, her eyes wide. Voices from before. From before Mu, he said quietly. From the first cycle of the sea. In Mu's philosophy, time was not a line, but a wave, rising, falling, returning. Every age was a crest upon the same eternal tide. The coral libraries were the ocean's own way of keeping record, storing the resonance of past civilizations swallowed long ago. And now, those ancient echoes were growing louder. Aruan led them deeper, where the coral formed arches like the ribs of a great creature. Between the pillars hung filaments of light, moving gently like strands of silk. When touched, they emitted faint tones, harmonics that formed a pattern of chords. Lyran followed the sound to a small alcove. In its center grew a single coral tree, white as bone, its branches etched with spiral patterns. She reached out to trace them, but as her fingers neared, the water around her began to hum. The spirals pulsed with light, blue, then gold, then blue again. Images flickered behind her closed eyes. Storms raging over a different ocean. Cities of light sinking beneath the waves. Hands releasing lanterns that drifted upward like stars. Then silence. She opened her eyes, trembling. These are memories of another Mu, she whispered. Aruan's expression was solemn, or the memory of what we once were, returning again. As they surfaced, the light above the sea had changed. The horizon gleamed too brightly, and the air tasted of salt and iron. Lyran climbed back into the boat, her heart still thrumming with the rhythm of the coral's song. The ocean holds our story, she said. But why now? Why does it remember now? Aruan gazed toward the clouds gathering far out to sea. Because we have forgotten, he said, and the sea does not allow silence for long. That evening, the wind turned warm and restless. Across Mu, waves lapped higher against the shore, and the voices of the coral libraries echoed faintly in the shells that decorated every home. People began to hear music in the wind, not imagined, but real. A low, harmonious note that rose and fell with the tide. Some found comfort in it, others felt unease. Kale, the Talaran musician, sat by the harbour as twilight deepened, tuning his instrument by ear. But the sound that came from the strings was strange, as if the sea itself were plucking them from beneath. He looked out over the darkening water. Faint lines of blue light traced the waves, stretching far into the horizon, like the veins of some vast living thing. He whispered to himself, "The ocean is awake." That night, Lyran dreamed again. But this time, she was underwater, standing among the coral pillars, light rippling through her like breath. Voices surrounded her, layered and infinite. They were not human. They were the ocean's own thoughts. And then, amid that chorus, one voice rose distinct and clear, the same she had heard in the coral. The tide remembers what the stars forget. Do not let the world fall silent again. When she woke, her pillow was damp with sea salt. At dawn, she went to Aruan's quarters, her voice trembling. "Master," she said, "the corals are speaking. They're warning us." Aruan nodded as though he had expected this. "The sea remembers the first fall," he said softly, "and it sings to prevent the second." He turned to the open window, watching as distant clouds rolled like slow silver mountains across the horizon. The echoes are returning, Lyran. The past is no longer content to sleep. Outside, the waves broke gently on the shore, but beneath their calm rhythm, a deeper tone pulsed, steady and ancient. The song of the forgotten seas had begun once more. The days that followed were heavy with brightness. Even the clouds seemed too radiant, the sun too gold. The light upon Mu had always been gentle, a soft shimmer through mist, but now it was fierce, almost watchful, as though the sky itself wished to see what the sea was remembering. In the capital city of Salonai, at the highest rise of coral terraces, stood the Temple of Radiance. It was built not from stone, but from translucent mineral, a substance that drank sunlight by day and glowed faintly at night. Its towers curved like seashells, each etched with flowing symbols of waves and flame. There, the priests of light kept their long vigil, guardians of the Anai flame, a sacred luminescence said to be the heart of Mu's wisdom. They tended it not as fire, but as living energy, a floating orb of light that pulsed in rhythm with the tides, fed by harmony, dimmed by discord. The people said that when the Anai flame brightened, peace filled every heart. When it flickered, storms were not far behind. And lately, it flickered often. Lyran had never entered the Temple of Radiance before. The air inside shimmered with heatless light, flowing like water across the walls. Every step she took sent soft ripples through the floor beneath her feet. Aruan walked beside her, his staff echoing gently. The priests of light preserve balance between our world and the sea's memory, he whispered. They listen not with ears, but with presence. They see what cannot yet be spoken. At the center of the vast chamber, the Anai flame hovered, a sphere of golden white brilliance suspended above a pool of still water. Around it stood a circle of priests, robed in pale silver, their eyes closed, their breathing synchronized like the rise and fall of the tide. The eldest among them, High Priestess Serai, raised her head as Aruan and Lyran approached. Her hair was long and silver white, her skin faintly luminous, as though reflecting the light she guarded. Aruan of the Watchers, she said, her voice calm and melodic. The ocean's song grows louder. The light trembles with it. You have felt it too. Aruan inclined his head. It speaks through coral, through current, through dream. The tide remembers, but we do not yet understand what it wishes to be known. Serai's gaze turned to Lyran. And you, child of ink and silence. You have walked the coral paths. Lyran nodded. The libraries are awake, High Priestess. The sea remembers everything, even what came before us. A long silence followed. Then Serai said softly, "Then the time of forgetting is ending." The priests invited Lyran and Aruan to join the ceremony of reflection, held each evening when the last sunlight touched the temple's highest spire. It was a ritual older than the written word, a practice of merging sight and sound, where the light of the flame would reveal truths hidden within the heart. As the ceremony began, the Anai flame brightened, spreading gentle radiance through the hall. The priests began to hum, a low, continuous tone that harmonized perfectly with the hum of the flame. Lyran closed her eyes, letting the vibration fill her. Slowly, shapes formed behind her eyelids, shifting visions of light over water, islands rising from mist, towers of coral gleaming under twin moons. Then the vision changed. The light turned red. The islands shuddered. The sea surged upward in silence, swallowing the towers whole. She gasped, breaking the harmony. The flame dimmed suddenly. A hush fell. Sarai's eyes opened, calm but sad. You saw it, didn't you? Lyran nodded, her voice trembling. The sea rising. The towers falling. Is it memory or prophecy? Sarai's reply was quiet. In Mu, there is no difference. That night, the flame burned unevenly. Small shadows trembled along the temple walls, forming fleeting shapes, outlines of creatures long extinct, cities submerged, stars rearranging themselves. The priests of light stood motionless, but their calm faces betrayed unease. Aruan remained beside Lyran. Do not fear what you saw, he murmured. Visions are not threats. They are questions awaiting understanding. But what if the sea's question is not meant to be answered? She whispered. He looked at her gravely. Then our task is not to answer, but to remember. The next morning, a storm gathered over the western horizon, vast, pale, silent. Lightning flickered within the clouds, yet there was no thunder. The priests of light took this as a sign. The ocean and the sky were in discourse. Sarai gathered them in the outer courtyard, where the temple's reflecting pools mirrored the uneasy sky. The sea remembers, she said, her voice carrying like wind over water. But so too must we. The flame dims because our hearts have grown too still. We've sung the songs of peace, but not of remembrance. The sea demands truth, not comfort. She raised her hands, and the pools began to glow faintly. Each of you, listen for the oldest sound you can recall. Not the voice of the ocean today, but of the world when it was new. The priests closed their eyes. The air grew heavy, the light deepened, and faint tones began to hum across the courtyard, not from the flame, but from the earth beneath. Lyran felt her chest tighten. The sound was mournful, immense, infinite. It was not a warning. It was grief, the world remembering its own loss. And then, through that vibration, a single phrase seemed to form, a whisper that filled every mind present. All that rises must one day return. The moment it faded, the storm broke. Rain fell in curtains of silver. The priest remained still as the temple walls shimmered, reflecting lightning that rippled soundlessly across the sky. The Anai flame flared once, brilliant and blinding, then dimmed to a soft pulse, steady but subdued. When silence returned, Sarai spoke again. The balance weakens. The flame answers the sea's lament. There will come a tide we cannot turn. Aruan bowed his head. Then we must prepare. She nodded, but her expression softened as she looked at Lyran. And yet, child, every cycle has its witness. Perhaps you are meant to remember what we cannot bear to see. Lyran met her gaze. Then I will remember, she whispered. That evening, as darkness spread over the sea, Lyran climbed to the temple's highest spire. The storm had passed, leaving the air clear and still. She could see the entire city below, its canals shimmering, its lanterns reflected in water like constellations brought to earth. And far beyond, she saw faint flashes of blue deep beneath the ocean surface, the coral libraries pulsing again. The sea was still singing. She closed her eyes, listening. The sound was familiar now, a deep, continuous tone beneath the world, the same she had heard in her dreams. It seemed to say, Do not let the light go out. She pressed her hand against the warm stone of the spire, whispering back, I won't. Below, the Anai flame pulsed once more, brighter this time, golden and alive, as though it had heard her. In the silence that followed, the stars emerged one by one, their reflections shimmering across the calm sea. And though no one in Mu could name it, a shift had begun. A subtle turning of the world's great tide. The priests of light watched from their luminous temple, feeling the pulse of the universe quicken around them. Somewhere far below, the coral libraries answered with a soft, sorrowful chord. The ocean was remembering faster now. Dawn spread over Mu like spilled gold. The sea was still, and the air smelled of salt and flowering reeds. Across the vast plains of white coral and shimmering lakes, the builders of Mu rose from their dwellings and walked into the light, their movements slow, measured, and almost ceremonial. They were known as the dream architects. In their hands, cities were born not from labor, but from song. They shaped the land the way poets shape words, gently, intuitively, listening to what the earth wished to become. It was said that every structure in Mu began as a vision shared in dream. An architect would sleep beside the ocean, and as dawn approached, the tide would whisper the form of what was to be built. A tower curved like the crescent moon, a bridge woven from sound, a garden that bloomed only at twilight. Then, the builders would gather and begin their work, guided by the remembered dream. And when they built, they did not use chisels or fire. They sang. Each tone from their voices carried patterns that stirred the coral's growth beneath their feet. The music caused the stone to bend and rise, to soften and take form. Walls grew from melody, columns from harmony. Their most sacred art was living architecture, temples that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of the sea, streets that glowed beneath the feet of those who walked in silence, domes that opened to reveal the stars whenever a song of remembrance was sung. In Mu, even cities were alive, but this harmony required balance, a perfect understanding between dream and reality, sound and silence, creation and humility. And lately, that balance was shifting. The sea sang differently now. Liran arrived in the city of Naihara, home of the dream architects, on a morning of radiant calm. The canals shimmered like liquid glass. Sculpted towers rose high, their peaks entwined with vines that glowed faintly in the light. Bridges arched like ribbons between them, casting rippling shadows below. At the city's heart stood the Hall of Resonance, where the master builders gathered to weave new dreams into the living coral. The hall was open to the sky, an immense circular plaza lined with crystalline arches that reflected the ocean's light in moving patterns. She was greeted by Master Tharlan, a tall, soft-spoken man whose eyes held both exhaustion and awe. Aruan said you would come, he said, bowing slightly. The sea's memory touches even our craft now. The corals grow faster than we can understand. They respond to voices we no longer control. He led her to the center of the plaza. There, a great structure was rising, not by human hands, but seemingly by its own will. The coral arched upward in slow, spiraling growth, forming tendrils of translucent white that curled like smoke. Liran could feel a hum in the air, deep and constant. It's building itself, she whispered. Thalen nodded. It listens to something deeper than our song, the Earth's own dreaming. As they watched, one of the younger architects approached the coral and sang a clear note. The structure paused in its growth, then shifted direction slightly, as though acknowledging the singer's tone. But when another voice joined, the coral wavered violently, its surface fracturing into bright cracks of light. The architects gasped and fell silent. The coral stilled. Its glow dimmed. Thalen's face grew pale. The harmony is thinning. Once, even dissonance was part of the song. Now it rejects us. Lyran placed her hand upon the coral's surface. It was warm, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. "It feels alive," she murmured. "It is," said Thalen softly. "And like all living things, it remembers pain." That evening, the architects gathered in a circle within the Hall of Resonance. They sang to calm the coral, to soothe its erratic growth. The melody rose in haunting waves, deep, slow tones layered with soft harmonics that shimmered like light through water. For a time, it worked. The coral glowed gently again, curling upward in steady, graceful spirals. Then, without warning, a tremor shook the floor. The sound wavered. The coral's light flared bright white, blinding, and a sharp crack echoed through the hall. When the brightness faded, one of the arches had split. Coral dust drifted through the air like snow. No one spoke. The song ended mid-note. Lyran looked at Thalen. "This has happened before, hasn't it?" He nodded grimly. "Yes. Each time we build, the sea answers back. Stronger, stranger, as if it remembers the first cities and resents the echo." Days passed, and the builders continued their work, determined to restore the harmony. They spent hours listening to the wind and the tides, searching for a new balance in the world's changing rhythm. Lyran began to notice patterns in the coral's growth, spirals that matched the designs carved in the Temple of Radiance, circles identical to those etched in the coral libraries. She began sketching them by hand, comparing each symbol, each curve. Slowly, she realized they were not random. They formed a sequence. Each spiral pointed toward the west, toward the open sea. When she brought her findings to Arwen, who had arrived days later, his expression darkened. "The coral points to what was lost," he said softly, "to the deep places that remember the last fall." Lyran shivered. "So this is not new?" "No," Arwen said. "It is the sea's oldest song." Creation, followed by silence. That night, Lyran joined the architects in the dream chamber, a sanctum where they slept in harmony to receive visions of design. The chamber walls pulsed faintly with light as they lay down on soft beds of woven sea flax. Outside, the tide murmured through the open arches. As the world slipped into dream, Lyran felt herself sinking into a vast ocean of colour. She drifted through light and sound, waves that became shapes, shapes that became cities. She saw the birth of Mu, a continent rising from blue depths, crowned with temples that shone like dawn. Voices sang in joy as coral grew upward to meet the sky. Then the vision changed. The sea darkened. The music deepened into a dirge. Towers of light crumbled into shadow. A voice, the same one she had heard in the coral, whispered again, "Remember what was before, so that it need not be again." She woke, gasping. The entire chamber glowed faintly blue, and every architect around her stirred, eyes wide with the same terror. They had all dreamed the same thing. At dawn, the builders gathered outside the Hall of Resonance, their faces pale in the rising light. Thalan spoke first. The dreams are warnings. The sea shows us what came before and what may return. But what can we do? A younger builder asked. Stop building? Stop dreaming. Aruan stepped forward. No, you must build differently. You must build to remember, not to conquer. Let the city reflect humility, not power. The sea does not fear creation. It fears forgetfulness. The architects bowed their heads. They understood. For days, Naihara became a place of quiet labour. No songs of triumph were sung, no great arches raised. Instead, they built small sanctuaries of remembrance, circular gardens open to the sky, where the tides could flow freely in and out. Each one contained a single coral pillar, carved with patterns of sound. Lyran helped inscribe the pillars with new symbols, not of perfection, but of impermanence. Waves breaking, stars fading, blossoms wilting. And as they worked, something remarkable happened. The coral began to sing again, softly at first, then clearly, not in defiance, but in harmony. The song spread through the city, vibrating through walls, through water, through hearts. Thalan wept quietly. It forgives us. But harmony, once broken, never returns unchanged. That night, a strange stillness fell over Mu. The wind died completely. The sea's surface shone mirror-flat beneath the moon, reflecting the stars so perfectly that it was impossible to tell where sky ended and water began. From the horizon came a faint glow, not of dawn, but of something rising beneath the waves. The glow spread slowly, pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Lyran watched from the balcony of her dwelling, her chest tight with both awe and dread. The sea is waking, she whispered. Far below, the coral gardens shimmered in response, their light matching the ocean's rhythm. Every structure, every tower, every bridge pulsed once, as if the entire continent of Mu had drawn a single breath. And in that breath, Lyran heard it again, the whisper from her dreams. The tide remembers what the stars forget. She turned toward the horizon, where the light beneath the waves was growing stronger, brighter, almost alive. Somewhere out there, beneath miles of water, something ancient was stirring, not in anger, but in remembrance. And though Mu's cities still glowed, still sang, still dreamed, a shadow of knowing had entered the hearts of its people. They had touched the boundary between creation and memory, and crossed it without meaning to. The dream had become aware of itself. Morning rose over Mu like a quiet promise. The sea was glass, the air a soft haze of gold. From every harbour, the scent of salt and polished wood drifted upward, mingled with the faint perfume of coral blossoms that lined the water's edge. In the city of Anai, the great harbour was alive with sound, not of trade or labour, but of farewell. Ships stood ready at the piers, their sails woven from luminous fibres that shimmered like captured dawnlight. Flags rippled in the soft wind, each marked with the spiral emblem of the tides, the ancient symbol of return. For the first time in generations, Mu was sending her explorers beyond the known horizon. After the visions of rising seas and the awakening coral, the circle of watchers had convened with the priests of light and the dream architects. Together they concluded one truth. The answers they sought no longer lay within Mu's shores. Something beyond the eastern edge, beyond even the arc of sunrise, was stirring the ocean's memory. So, they built vessels strong enough to cross the outer waters, great catamarans carved from coral wood, their hulls curved like crescent moons, their decks lined with silver instruments that measured wind, current, and vibration. They were not ships of conquest or commerce. They were instruments of listening. The fleet was called the Voyage of Resonance, and at its heart sailed Captain Cale, the musician turned navigator. His gift for harmony, the way he could hear the ocean's moods in tone and rhythm, made him the chosen one to lead. Lyran stood among those gathered to see them off, her hair lifted by the sea breeze, the smell of salt on her lips. Aruan was beside her, his old hands clasped over his staff. "Beyond the sunrise," he said softly, "lies not discovery, but remembrance. They do not seek what is new, only what was lost." Lyran nodded. "Then may the sea return them safely to us." As dawn touched the horizon, drums sounded, low, steady, echoing like a heartbeat. The crews stepped aboard, robes fluttering in the morning wind. Kyle raised his hand in salute, his eyes reflecting the pale sun. "May the ocean sing kindly to us," he said. The drums ceased. The sails caught the first breath of wind, and the fleet glided from the harbour, leaving trails of light upon the water. The crowd stood silent. Even the gulls above seemed to hold their cries. It felt less like a departure and more like an ancient ritual repeating itself, as if somewhere, long ago, the same ships had already made this journey. Days passed. The fleet sailed eastward, where the sea deepened into a shade of impossible blue. By night, the stars seemed closer, as if the ocean had drawn the sky downward. Kyle often stood at the prow, playing soft notes upon his sea harp. The music blended with the wind, and the waves seemed to move in rhythm to it. His crew trusted him completely, for his ear could sense the subtle shift of currents long before instruments could. But one night, under a moonless sky, the rhythm changed. The water grew unnaturally calm, not peaceful, but still, like breath held too long. Kyle stopped playing. "Do you hear it?" he murmured. The helmsman frowned. "Hear what?" "The silence," Kyle said. "It has weight." By morning, the silence broke, not with sound but with light. The sea ahead glowed faintly, as if a second dawn were rising beneath the surface. The sailors leaned over the rails, eyes wide. Schools of luminous fish swam in vast circles, forming spirals that stretched miles across. Lyran, had she been there, would have recognized the pattern. The same spirals carved into the coral of the libraries. Kyle's heart raced. "This is no current," he whispered. "It's a map." He ordered the ships to follow the glowing trail. For hours, they drifted through a sea alive with light, until the pattern widened and began to fade, revealing at its center something vast and dark beneath the water. At first they thought it was a shadow, then slowly it rose. A massive structure emerged from the depths, a plateau of black stone covered in moss and coral. Water streamed from its sides in glistening sheets. It was not land nor wreckage, but something in between, the uppermost edge of a sunken continent. Kyle stared in awe. "We have found it," he breathed. "The first Mu." They lowered anchor and descended into small boats. The surface was rough underfoot, worn smooth by centuries of tide. Strange markings covered the rock, spirals, circles, and wave lines glowing faintly in the mist. One sailor knelt and brushed his fingers over the carvings. "They're warm," he said in disbelief. As if alive. Kyle touched one himself, and a pulse of light flared outward, racing across the plateau in every direction. The air hummed. The sea around them rippled. For a heartbeat, Kyle felt as though the world itself were breathing through him. Then the light vanished. That night, anchored above the plateau, the fleet floated in eerie calm. The ocean glowed faintly beneath, as though something vast and dreaming stirred in its depths. Kyle sat alone on deck, gazing into the water. He could still feel the hum through the planks beneath his feet. It was not hostile, not warning, but waiting. He began to play again, softly, a song of peace, of return. The notes shimmered across the surface like drops of silver, and then faintly, the sea answered. A tone rose from below, deep and resonant, perfectly in harmony with his melody. The crew awoke, emerging from their cabins in stunned silence. The ocean was singing. Kyle's eyes filled with tears. "It remembers," he whispered. At that same moment, far away in Mu, Liren awoke from a restless dream. She had heard the same song, Kale's melody, echoing through her sleep, joined by a voice that sounded like the sea itself. She rose and went to the balcony, her robe trailing softly behind her. The night was calm. The stars reflected perfectly in the water below, forming a twin sky. And yet, beneath that still surface, she could feel movement, as though the ocean's heart was beating faster. She whispered into the wind, "Kyle, what have you found?" On the open sea, Kale and his crew stayed anchored for 3 nights. Each evening, the ocean sang, a deep, vibrating chorus that filled their dreams and left them weeping with wonder. They began to see visions in the glow, cities of light beneath the water, people moving as if through glass, their faces serene. On the 4th dawn, the singing stopped. The water went still. The air grew cold. Kale ordered the anchors raised. "The sea has shown us what it wished to show," he said quietly. "We must return." But as they turned their ships westward, the wind shifted violently. Clouds gathered with unnatural speed. The first drops of rain hissed against the decks. Lightning split the horizon. White fire across the sea. Aruan's words echoed in Kale's mind. "Remembrance is never gentle." The storm struck before nightfall. The wind howled like 1,000 voices, and the glowing sea turned black. Waves rose higher than towers, swallowing ships whole. Kyle gripped the tiller, shouting commands lost to the wind. The ocean song had changed, no longer harmony, but lament. He heard it even through the roar of the storm, a deep, mournful tone, ancient and unending. All that rises must one day return. When dawn finally broke, the sea was calm again. Debris drifted over the waves, broken masts, fragments of sails, glowing shards of coral. Only one ship remained. Kyle stood at the helm, soaked and silent. The others were gone. He turned toward the west, toward home. The horizon shimmered faintly in the morning light. He whispered to the sea, "We heard you. We remember." And as the ship began its slow journey back toward Mu, a faint glow lingered beneath the waves, the last trace of the sunken plateau fading once more into the deep. Back in Mu, the priests of light gathered in silent vigil. The Anai flame flickered weakly, its once steady pulse uncertain. Lyra knelt before it, tears streaking her face. She did not yet know whether the fleet had survived. only that the ocean's voice had changed. The whisper beneath the waves was no longer distant. It was beneath their very feet now, singing through the foundations of their temples. And though no one could yet name it, every heart in Mu felt the same truth. The sea had begun to remember too much. The sea lay quiet again, as though nothing had ever disturbed it. Days passed with no storms, no tremors, no discord. The air returned to its soft warmth, and the light over Mu was clear as crystal. Yet beneath this calm, a quiet tension lingered, like the silence before a note is struck. News of Kale's voyage spread slowly, carried by the few surviving sailors who reached the western ports. Their stories told of glowing seas, sunken ruins, and a voice rising from the deep. Some called it the song of the ocean's heart. Others whispered that the sea had begun to mourn. The priest of light, the watchers, and the dream architects met beneath the temple domes of Salanai. The Anai flame burned low and steady, neither bright nor dim, as though listening. "We have stirred the ocean's memory," said Aruan. "It calls to us not in anger, but in need. It wishes to be remembered rightly." "And how shall we answer?" asked High Priestess Serai. Aruan's eyes reflected the flame, with harmony, with remembrance, with song. So began the creation of the Garden of 10,000 Voices, a work unlike anything Mu had ever attempted. It would not be a single garden, but a living network stretching from the northern mountains to the southern reefs. Every city, every village, every island of Mu would become part of one vast harmonic field, a collective song designed to soothe the sea's awakening. The dream architects shaped its form, spiraling corridors of coral that led to great open plazas filled with fountains, mirrors, and glowing flora. The priests tuned the sacred tones that would keep its rhythm, low vibrations designed to align the hearts of those who walked within. And the people, every man, woman, and child, were invited to lend their voice. 10,000 singers, and then 10,000 more, gathered across the land, each trained to sustain a tone that blended perfectly with the next. Together, they would form a single, continuous resonance. It would be the greatest harmony Mu had ever known. When the day came, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The sun rose through a veil of pale mist, and a hush fell across the continent. From the shores of Naihara to the cliffs of Salanai, people stood in silence, eyes closed, waiting for the signal. At the Temple of Radiance, High Priestess Sarai lifted her hands toward the sky. "May the sea hear not our fear," she said softly, "but our remembrance." Then she gave a single nod. Aruan struck the first note. Deep, resonant, endless. The sound rolled through the temple halls like thunder softened by love. One by one the priests joined him, then the musicians of Mu, then the dream architects and their apprentices. In the streets and fields, the people added their voices, and soon the entire continent of Mu was singing. It was not music as we know it. It was not melody or rhythm, but vibration, a living hum that carried through the air and deep into the ground. The coral towers glowed, resonating with the same tone. The lakes shimmered with rippling light. Even the mountains seemed to tremble gently in time. Birds took flight, their wings catching the light of the rising sun. Dolphins leapt from the coastal waters, joining the chorus with their cries. For a moment that stretched beyond time, the entire world seemed to breathe in harmony. Lyran stood at the edge of the eastern cliffs, singing softly. The wind played with her hair, and tears glistened on her cheeks. She could feel the ocean answering, each wave cresting in time with the rhythm of her heart. This is what the sea wanted, she thought. It wanted to be heard. Beside her, Aruan's voice trembled, but never broke. Though his years were many, the strength of the sound within him was that of a young man. When his tone faded, he looked toward the horizon. "Listen," he said. "Do you hear it?" Lyran nodded. "The sea is singing back." And it was. From the depths came a low, rising tone, deep and steady, carrying across the miles like the breath of a giant. The ocean's song merged with the chorus of humanity until there was no separation between them. Sea and land, memory and voice, all had become one. Hours passed, yet the song did not fade. The garden of 10,000 voices thrummed with power. The coral glowed brighter than ever before, radiating warmth and calm. The Anai flame blazed gold, pulsing in perfect rhythm with the waves. For the first time since the awakening of the ocean's memory, peace seemed possible. But in that peace lay an unseen cost. The sea, soothed and awakened, began to reflect what it remembered, and not all of it was gentle. Beneath the beauty of the garden, deep currents stirred. The sound waves that rippled through the water reached the lowest trenches, where light had never touched. There, among the ancient stones of the first Mu, something began to shift. A single bubble rose from the dark, then another and another, until the ocean floor trembled. The harmony that bound all life in Mu was perfect, but too perfect. And perfection, like silence, could not last. That night, after the final echoes faded, the singers fell asleep where they stood. The air was warm and filled with a faint, glowing mist. Lyran wandered through the garden, unable to rest. The coral pillars hummed softly, like memories speaking in their sleep. She placed her hand on one and felt it vibrate faintly beneath her touch. A sudden stillness filled the air, a silence deeper than any before. Then she heard it, not from above, but from beneath the ground, a distant, rumbling note, slow and immense. The coral beneath her hand grew hot. The light within it flickered. She stepped back just as a crack split down its center. The vibration spread through the earth, so faint at first that only the most attuned could sense it. Aruan appeared beside her, his face pale. "Do not be afraid," he said softly. "The sea is only remembering more deeply." "But what if it remembers the end?" Aruan closed his eyes. "Then we must teach it to dream again." The next morning, the world of Mu seemed reborn. The gardens shimmered with dew, the air was bright and alive, and laughter echoed from every street. The harmony had not been in vain. The people believed the balance had been restored. Only the elders noticed the subtle change in the tides. The water lingered higher on the shores, the pull of the moon slightly offbeat. The Anai flame burned with a faint blue hue that had never been seen before. To most it was nothing, a beautiful afterglow of the great harmony. To the few who listened, it was the echo of something vast awakening below. That evening, as the sun sank into the western sea, the waves glowed faintly again. Soft blue spirals spreading outward from the horizon. The people gathered along the beaches, smiling, believing it was the ocean's answer of gratitude. But Lyran's heart felt heavy. She watched the light twist and fade beneath the surface and thought of Kyle, of his ship swallowed by the storm, of his music echoing through the depths. The sea's song, though beautiful, now carried a new undertone, a sadness too deep for words. She whispered to the wind, "We have given the ocean our voice, but what will it give us in return?" And far beneath her, the ocean answered with a sound she did not yet understand, a heartbeat, slow, vast, and rising. Night came softly over Mu. The heat of day faded, and the air filled with the scent of rain that never quite fell. The sea was calm again, and yet every wave seemed to move with deliberation, as though aware of its own rhythm. High above, the sky unfolded like a silk tapestry of light. Thousands of stars burned steady and familiar, their constellations forming the same sacred shapes known to Mu for centuries. The people had always trusted the stars. They were the map of all things constant, the fixed chorus against which the ocean sang. But on that night, something changed. The stars began to move. It was subtle at first. Aruan noticed it while standing on the balcony of the Observatory of Winds, a tall, glassy dome overlooking the western sea. He often came there when sleep refused him, to listen to the sigh of night currents and trace the heavens with patient eyes. He leaned upon his staff, studying the constellation of Tiranu, the star of memory, a cluster shaped like a spiral shell. It had always risen precisely above the same horizon point each year. But tonight, it shimmered faintly, and then, almost imperceptibly, shifted. His heart sank. He waited, breath held. The other stars around it quivered too, like ripples spreading from an unseen drop. He whispered to himself, "The heavens are listening." By morning, word had spread among the astronomers of Mu, a learned order who studied the sky's rhythm as the priests studied the flame. They gathered atop the observatory's spiral steps, instruments of bronze and crystal arranged before them. Liren stood among them, recording each measurement carefully. She had come to learn, to listen, but mostly because she felt something stirring, a strange hum that resonated within her bones whenever she looked at the stars. The astronomer Magus, Ilarion, a tall man whose eyes gleamed like moonlit stone, raised his hand. "Brothers and sisters," he said, "the heavens no longer move by their old design. The spiral of Tiranu shifts each night. The star of the east fades early. The arc of the moons is no longer true." A murmur spread through the group. "Perhaps it is illusion," one said. "Perhaps the atmosphere," another suggested. Ilarion shook his head. "No, the tremor of the sea echoes in the sky. The earth and the stars share one breath, and that breath is faltering." Aruan spoke softly. "The sea remembers. Now, so does the sky." For generations, the people of Mu had believed that the stars were the reflection of their world below, that each human heart mirrored a light above, bound by unseen threads. To them, the cosmos was not separate, but an extension of the ocean's mind. So when the stars began to flicker and tremble, the priests of light interpreted it not as chaos, but as conversation. The heavens, they said, were answering the garden of 10,000 voices. Night after night, the astronomers gathered to watch. Each evening, more stars wavered. Some brightened, others dimmed. Lines of light rippled faintly between constellations, forming patterns that had never been recorded. Spirals and waveforms, like those carved into Mu's coral temples. The sky, it seemed, was imitating the sea, and the people, rather than fearful, found beauty in it. Children watched from rooftops, laughing as the stars danced. Musicians composed new melodies inspired by their shifting rhythm. The priests proclaimed it a blessing. The ocean's memory now reflected in the heavens. Only Lyran and Aruan felt the unease that hid within that beauty. One night, while others slept, Lyran remained at the observatory. She traced the sky through the crystal lenses, charting the trembling constellations. The air was perfectly still, yet the stars pulsed like living hearts. And then she noticed something new. A faint band of light across the southern horizon, like the edge of a rising tide. It shimmered faintly, undulating as though moving with the sea. She called to Aruan, who climbed the steps slowly, his robes brushing against the polished stone. He followed her gaze. "The stars near the horizon," she said. "They move like waves." He frowned. "They are not stars." "What do you mean?" "They are reflections," he whispered. "The sky is mirroring what happens below. The ocean's light has reached upward, into the heavens." Lyran's breath caught. "Then the sea and sky have become one." Aruan's expression darkened. "Yes, and when boundaries dissolve, so does balance." Days passed. The air grew heavier. The light of dawn lingered longer than it should have, painting the world in hues of silver and rose. Shadows bent slightly eastward, as though the sun itself had shifted. At night, the trembling stars intensified. The sky no longer felt infinite. It felt close, as if it had descended to rest upon the world's shoulders. Birds flew in confused spirals, unable to find their direction. The ocean glowed faintly all through the dark, as though lit from beneath by constellations mirrored in its depths. The people began to call these nights the days of the two skies, for above and below the same stars shimmered. One evening, High Priestess Sarai summoned Aruan and Lyran to the Temple of Radiance. The Anai flame flickered blue-white, casting restless shadows across the chamber. "The light grows uncertain," she said. "The heavens reflect our own trembling. Perhaps it is not only the sea remembering, but the universe itself awakening." Aruan bowed his head. "All things that are connected will one day speak the same language." Sarai turned to Lyran. "And what do you feel, child?" Lyran hesitated. "It feels like the sky is breathing with us. But its breath is too deep, too vast. It pulls at something within." Sarai nodded slowly. "Then we must breathe slower. Sing softer. The stars tremble because we have sung too loud." She looked to the flame, its pulse now matching the faint flicker of the constellations above. If the heavens mirror the ocean, and the ocean mirrors us, then we must learn silence before memory becomes storm. The priests began a new ritual, the vigil of stillness. Each night, they gathered in silence beneath open domes, refraining from music or chant. They let their stillness become their offering, their way of calming the unseen tides. For a time, it seemed to help. The trembling lessened. The sky steadied. The Anai flame glowed softly again. But on the 13th night, a strange light appeared, a single star, brighter than all others, burning above the eastern horizon. It shimmered, wavered, and then split into three, forming a perfect triangle of light. Gasps filled the temple. Sarai whispered, "A new constellation." Aruan's voice trembled. "No, an old one, the triad of descent, the sign of return. Throughout Mu, people awoke to the same sight, the triad blazing above the ocean, its reflection mirrored perfectly below. For hours it remained fixed, pulsing faintly, as if marking the rhythm of a sleeping heart. Then, just before dawn, it flickered once, twice, and vanished. When morning came, the tides were higher. The coral gardens hummed faintly without wind or touch. And from deep within the ocean, a slow vibration rose. One that shook the Anai flame and made even the stars above seem to shudder. The people of Mu stood in wonder beneath the glowing dawn, unaware that the trembling of the heavens was not merely reflection, but warning. Aruan looked to Liran, his voice no louder than a whisper. The sky remembers what comes next. The rain began without thunder. Softly, almost kindly, it fell like silver thread from a sky too bright to be night and too dim to be day. The first drops touched the streets of Mu with warmth, not chill, a rain that shimmered as it landed, leaving faint traces of light where it struck the coral stone. The people looked upward in wonder. For 1,000 years, the rain had come and gone with rhythm, predictable as breath. But this rain was strange. It sang. A low hum vibrated through the droplets, through the air, through the bones of the earth itself. Lyran stood beneath the open roof of the Temple of Radiance, her face tilted toward the sky. She could feel the vibration deep inside her chest, steady, sorrowful, immense. "It's beautiful," whispered one of the acolytes beside her. But Aruan, standing in the doorway, did not smile. "It is not rain," he said softly. "It is memory, returning to where it began." For 3 days and nights the rain did not cease. The rivers swelled, their waters turning from crystal blue to deep azure. The lakes rose and spread over their banks. In the mountain valleys, mist gathered so thick it seemed to hold its own light. The priest of light watched the Anai flame flicker wildly, its colours shifting, gold, blue, violet, white. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the rain's hum. "The sea is breathing in," said Sarai, "and when it exhales, it will not be gentle." Still, the people did not fear. They believed the ocean was cleansing itself, washing away imbalance, rejoining the world in harmony. Children danced in the glowing rain. Farmers placed bowls beneath the eaves to collect the light-filled water, believing it sacred. The land seemed alive, the very soil humming faintly with warmth. But beneath the beauty, something vast was stirring. One evening, when the rain had softened to a mist, Lyran climbed to the high cliffs overlooking the eastern sea. From there she could see the great expanse stretching endlessly to the horizon. But tonight, the horizon was gone. The line where sea met sky had vanished into a haze of silver and blue. The ocean shimmered as though alive, pulsing faintly like the heart of some dreaming creature. And then she saw it. The faintest rise, subtle but real. The waterline had climbed higher against the rocks. It was not yet a flood. It was a slow inhalation. She whispered, "The sea is remembering the shape it once held." Behind her, Aruan's voice replied, "And the land remembers that it was once the sea." The next day, the currents shifted. Fishermen who ventured beyond the reefs returned wide-eyed, saying that the deep channels had changed direction. The ocean now moved not outward, but inward, toward the heart of Mu. In the southern plains, water seeped up from the ground where no rivers flowed. Springs appeared in dry fields, bubbling clear and luminous. The people rejoiced, calling it a blessing. Only the dream architects understood the truth. They felt the change in their foundations, the subtle swelling of the coral beneath their cities. Master Thalen sent word to Lyran. The coral sings again. It sings of return. When she visited Naihara, she found the streets glimmering with a faint sheen of water. The great hall of resonance stood half submerged, the coral arches glowing softly beneath the waves. And yet, the sound that filled the air was not chaos, but peace, the deep, eternal hum of the sea reclaiming its own. Thalen smiled as he waded through the shallows. It's not destruction, he said. It's remembrance. Lyran looked around her, the reflection of towers shimmering in the water, the air thick with the scent of salt and blossoms. Then remembrance is more powerful than we ever imagined. In the following weeks, the tides grew bolder. Shorelines dissolved grain by grain, rivers merged with the sea, and the boundaries between salt and fresh vanished. At night, the stars reflected perfectly in the rising waters, so that to stand upon a hilltop was to stand between two skies. The people called these nights the hours of reflection, believing heaven and earth had at last become one. But the elders of Mu began to retreat into silence. They knew the old prophecies, whispers preserved in coral and song, of a time when the sea would reclaim the land, not in wrath, but in balance. The cycle was turning once more. Aruan met with Sarai in the temple courtyard as the rain finally ceased. Mist hung thick in the air, glowing faintly with the light of the Anai flame within. "The sea is rising," he said simply. Sarai nodded. "The flame told me last night. It dreams now of silence." Aruan looked toward the open horizon, where the water glimmered higher than before. "We cannot stop it." "No," said Sarai. "But we can choose how to remember." She turned to Lyran, who had been standing quietly behind them. "You are the scribe of this age. What you write will outlast us. Do not write of fear. Write of beauty, of the song that returned to its source." Lyran bowed her head. "I will." The final ceremony of Mu was held under a pale, endless sky. Every temple bell rang once, their tones carrying far across the water. The priests gathered upon the steps of the Temple of Radiance, their robes glimmering with threads of light. Sarai lifted her hands. "All that we are was born of the sea," she said, "and to the sea we return, not as loss, but as memory." The people bowed. Many wept, though not from fear. There was a strange peace in the air, the kind one feels before falling asleep. And then, as if answering her prayer, the sea began to move. The horizon swelled and deepened, and the first great wave rose, silent and gleaming. It did not crash, it glided forward, graceful and slow. The people watched as it climbed the shore, filling the canals, caressing the steps of the temples. Lyran held Aruan's hand as the water reached their feet. It was warm, almost kind. The city's reflections shimmered and merged with the real until there was no boundary between them. Everywhere, the coral glowed brighter, not breaking, but blooming, releasing soft light as it touched the rising tide. The gardens shone like constellations sinking into a deeper sky. And through it all, there was song, not of panic, but of farewell. The 10,000 voices rose again, softer now, slower, until it was no longer sound but vibration, merging with the sea itself. As the water reached the temple steps, Sarai's voice carried above the hum. The light does not end, it only changes depth. The Anai flame flared once, brilliant gold, then folded in upon itself, sinking slowly into the water. The light rippled outward, then disappeared beneath the waves. The great descent had begun, but there was no terror, only surrender. When night fell, all that remained above the water were the tips of towers and the faint shimmer of coral blooms swaying beneath the moonlight. From the cliffs, the last watchers of Mu saw the sea calm again, perfectly smooth, perfectly still. It was as though nothing had ever been lost. Only Lyran's voice remained, soft and steady, carried on the wind. The sea remembers, and we are remembered within it. The day faded quietly, as though afraid to disturb the sea. What little land remained of Mu glowed under the last light of dusk. Towers half sunken, bridges dissolving into their reflections, gardens swaying gently beneath the tide. The air carried no cries, no panic, only the whisper of water rising where streets had once been. It was evening, yet the horizon burned faintly gold. Clouds moved slow and heavy across the sky, their undersides lit by a strange radiance from the sea below. The waters of Mu were luminous now, alive with drifting light, as though the very soul of the continent had dissolved into its depths. The priests called it the Great Illumination. The people called it the Night of Vanishing Shores. Lyran stood upon what had once been the balcony of her dwelling, now a narrow island of stone. The water lapped at her ankles, warm and clear. Around her, fragments of coral walls shimmered beneath the surface, alive with colour, pink, blue, and silver threads weaving in gentle motion. She gazed across the endless water. Where the city of Naihara once stood, there was now only a vast mirrored plain. The tallest spires still reached above the surface, glowing faintly like lanterns adrift in fog. And through the quiet, she could hear faint music, the echo of the 10,000 voices, carried not by air, but by current. It rose and fell with the tide, haunting, beautiful, eternal. The ocean had taken their song and made it its own. Aruan joined her, leaning on his staff. His robes were soaked, yet his expression was serene. "The sea has finished its remembering," he said. Lyran turned to him. "And what of us?" He smiled faintly. "We are part of that memory now." They stood in silence for a time, watching the last sunlight fade. All across the horizon, waves glowed faintly, pulsing like the breath of a sleeping giant. Fish of shimmering glass drifted through the submerged streets. Here and there, domes of air trapped beneath archways reflected the dimming sky, holding fragments of the world that had been. Lyran could see shapes moving beneath the water. Arches, plazas, the soft curves of coral towers still intact. It was not ruin, but transformation. Mu was not dying. It was descending into another form of life. From the temple ruins, bells began to sound, soft tones struck by the currents themselves. The ocean moved through them gently, drawing music from stone. Each note rose and lingered, echoing across the water. The bells of Mu sang one last time. The people who remained, scattered across the higher terraces and mountain ridges, listened in silence. Many knelt. Others lifted their faces to the sky, whispering thanks. To live in Mu was to understand the sea as both cradle and return. They had always known the cycle would one day close, and now it did. not as a punishment, but as a homecoming. Night deepened. The stars appeared, but not as they once had. Their reflections in the sea were so clear that the world seemed doubled, suspended between two heavens. Above and below, constellations trembled in unison, as if the sky itself bowed to the ocean's calm. From where Lyran stood, it was impossible to tell which way was up, whether she was gazing at stars or at their echoes below. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Aruan nodded. This is how the world began. Light upon water, water upon light. Far out on the horizon, a glow appeared, a slow, spreading shimmer of gold that rolled across the surface, like dawn rising from below. The water stirred, smooth and deliberate. Aruan's eyes reflected the light. "It comes," he said softly. "The sea's final embrace." Lyran felt her breath catch. The glow grew stronger, filling the sky with soft radiance. It was not frightening. It was tender, like the closing of weary eyes. She thought of Kael and his fleet, of the coral libraries, of the priests of light. All their songs, their memories, their love, now one with the sea. And suddenly she understood. Mu had not been lost. It had been invited home. The water reached the temple steps. Sarai, her silver hair drifting around her shoulders, stood before the Anai flame for the last time. The light within the flame pulsed weakly, then flared, sending a beam upward that pierced the clouds. She turned to the gathered priests and smiled. "The flame does not die. It travels." Then, as the water rose to meet her, she stepped forward and vanished into the glow. The beam of light bent slowly downward, joining the sea. When it touched the surface, a ring of luminescence spread outward, encircling the last towers of Mu. Everywhere it passed, the water shimmered with colour, coral bloomed anew, and silence deepened. By midnight, the last of the city's rooftops slipped beneath the waves. Only the tips of spires and the highest mountain ridges remained, shining faintly under the starlight. Lyran and Aruan climbed to the final ridge, a narrow crest above what had once been Salonai. They stood hand in hand, surrounded by the sound of gentle waves. "It's not an ending," said Aruan, his voice barely audible. "Only a deeper beginning." Lyran nodded, though her throat tightened with grief. "Will anyone remember us?" "Everything that listens will," he said. "The sea remembers, the stars remember, and one day, when the world is ready to dream again, they will hear our song." She smiled through her tears. "Then we will not be lost." "No," said Aruan, "only transformed." The moon rose high. The water glowed silver, folding over itself in calm rhythm. The stars above and their reflections below merged into a single field of light. As the waves touched their feet, Lyran closed her eyes. She felt no fear, only warmth, a deep, enveloping peace. The ocean's hum surrounded her, steady and slow, like a heartbeat vast enough to hold the world. She could hear voices within it, familiar and endless. The voices of the priests, the dream architects, the sailors, the children, all blended into one harmonious tone. It was the final song of Mu. At last, the ridge itself began to sink. Lyran opened her eyes for one final glimpse of the stars. "They're so close," she whispered. Aruan smiled. "That's because we've joined them." Then the water closed over them, and the world fell utterly still. Centuries would pass. The sea would change its color. The winds would carry new names. But deep beneath the waves, the lights of Mu would continue to glow, faint, eternal, like constellations sleeping in the ocean's heart. And sometimes, when the world grew quiet enough, the waves would hum softly in the dark. A melody without words, a lullaby of memory. Those who listened closely would hear it and wonder, but the sea would never explain. It would only whisper, as it always had. The tide remembers what the stars forget. The world was ocean, endless, silver blue, and silent. When morning came, it rose without horizon. The sun appeared not above the sea, but within it, a pale disk, trembling in reflection, as though the sky had been swallowed by the water. No birds called. No wind stirred. Only the sound of small waves lapping against wood, the fragile rhythm of survival. 3 vessels drifted where once the mountains of Mu had stood. They were small reed ships, hastily bound during the final hours, carrying those who had been upon the high ridges when the water came. The ocean had lifted them gently, as though unwilling to harm what still remembered how to sing. Among them was Lyran. She sat at the bow of one of the boats, her hair damp with salt and her eyes fixed on the horizon. All around her was light, the pale shimmer of dawn, the gold of reflection, the faint glimmer of things once great, now resting far below. She did not weep. The sea was too quiet for tears. It felt wrong to cry in the presence of such vast peace. At her side lay a single sealed vessel, a small crystal sphere glowing faintly with its own light. Within it flickered the last fragment of the Anai flame, carried from the temple before it sank. Its pulse was steady and warm, matching her own heartbeat. "The light travels," Sarai had said before stepping into the water. And it had. Across the endless plain of water, the survivors called to one another in soft voices. The sound carried clearly in the still air. "Are you safe?" "Here, here." "We drift together." The wind moved at last, a slow, sighing breath from the east. The sails filled, and the boats turned gently toward the light. Lyran looked down through the water. It was impossibly clear. Beneath her, faint outlines shimmered, arches, domes, and terraces glowing softly, like the reflections of dreams. Mu still lived beneath them, transformed into a city of light. For a long while, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Thank you." As the sun climbed, warmth returned to the air. The survivors began to sing, not songs of sorrow, but the low, wordless tones of remembrance. The same harmonies that had once shaped coral and temple now rippled across the open water. The sea answered with gentle motion, forming rings that spread outward like breathing. A ruin had told her once that harmony could travel farther than any ship, that even when the singers were gone, the vibration would continue, moving through water and stone until another heart heard it. Now, as she sang, Lyran realized that this was true. Mu was not gone, it was traveling. In her voice, in the sea, in the silence that followed. By midday, clouds gathered far to the south, not storm clouds, but tall white towers that glowed faintly from within. The survivors watched them drift closer, their edges burning with rainbow light. "It's the breath of the world," someone murmured. Lyran smiled faintly. "No, it's the world dreaming again." The wind grew steadier. The small fleet moved faster, gliding across the endless expanse. Days and nights passed gently, indistinguishable from one another. The The stars still trembled faintly, but no longer in fear. Their light was softer now, diffused by the mist that hung perpetually above the sea. Each night, Lyran held the crystal flame close and spoke softly to it, as if to a child. "We remember you," she would whisper. "We remember everything." And the light would pulse once, an answering heartbeat. On the seventh dawn, they found land. It rose from the horizon slowly, dark green against the pale sky. The sight of it drew gasps from every throat. They rowed until their arms trembled, until the water grew shallow and clear. The boat slid onto soft sand. They stepped ashore. The earth was warm beneath their feet, untouched, waiting. The survivors stood in silence, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of birds and wind through leaves. It felt strange to hear the world breathing again. Lyran knelt and pressed her palm to the ground. "It's alive," she whispered. "It welcomes us." They built a small camp above the tide line, shelters of reeds and driftwood, fires kindled from dried seaweed. At night, they gathered around the Anai flame. Its glow was small now, barely a candle's strength, but it warmed them in ways the fire could not. A child, one of the youngest survivors, sat beside Lyran, eyes wide. "Will Mu come back?" she asked. Lyran smiled gently. "It never left. It's beneath us, in the sea, in the sky, in our hearts. The ocean remembers, and so do we." The child nodded, comforted, and fell asleep beside her. Lyran looked out over the water, where faint lights still shimmered far below the surface. "We are the memory now," she whispered. In the following days, the survivors explored the island. They found freshwater streams, fruit-bearing trees, and long stretches of sand where strange shells lay half buried. Spirals like those carved into Mu's temples. They took it as a sign. The sea had guided them to a place already touched by its dream. Under Lyran's guidance, they began to build again, not with ambition, but with reverence. Small dwellings made of coral and wood, shaped to the wind, aligned to the stars. Each stone was laid with a quiet prayer, each structure a promise not to forget. They called their new home Luma, meaning echo of light. Every evening, as the sun sank into the sea, they sang, not the grand harmonies of old Mu, but soft, simple songs of gratitude. And the waves answered. One night, as she sat alone by the water, Lyran noticed something glowing far out in the sea, a faint flicker, deep below the surface. She leaned forward, heart quickening. The glow pulsed once, then again, in slow, familiar rhythm. The Anai flame, she realized, was calling to something beneath, a reflection, or perhaps its source. She smiled, tears glinting in the firelight. "We are heard," she whispered. Years would pass. Children born on Luma would grow, learning the songs of the sea from those who had lived through its remembering. They would not speak of Mu as loss, but as origin, the first home, the deep memory beneath all things. They would say that when the ocean glows at night, it is the city of Mu breathing in its sleep. And when they sang their evening hymns, their voices blending with the rhythm of the tide, they would feel a presence, vast, kind, and eternal, humming gently beneath them. Lyran grew older, her hair turning silver like the light of dawn. Each day she walked the shore, listening to the whisper of the waves. She no longer feared the sea's voice. It had become her companion, her teacher, her mirror. One morning, As the first light touched the horizon, she carried the small crystal flame to the edge of the water. She held it for a long time, watching it pulse faintly in her hands. Then she knelt and set it adrift. The sphere floated out over the calm sea, catching the sunrise as it went. The light grew brighter, spreading in soft ripples across the surface until it merged completely with the reflection of the sky. Liren smiled. "Travel well," she whispered. Behind her, the waves carried her voice away, a final offering from the survivors of Mu to the ocean that had once cradled their world. And so began the second age, the age of wandering light, when memory became legend and legend became dream. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the wind lay still and the sea shone like glass, the people of Luma would hear a distant hum beneath the water, the song of the ocean, remembering the voices that had once sung to it. And they would answer softly, "We remember too." Time moved softly, like a tide between dreams. The sea that once drowned a world now carried life between distant shores. Its colour had changed, a deeper, wiser blue, but its rhythm remained the same, the slow breath of the earth remembering. Generations had passed since the sinking of Mu. The island of Luma, born from survival and silence, had become a cradle of new beginnings. Its people lived gently, speaking with the wind, shaping homes that grew into the landscape rather than above it. They built gardens where coral and vine intertwined, and their children played among the tides without fear. The ocean had ceased to be a force of loss. It was their teacher now, their mirror, their library. At twilight, the elders would sit near the fire, their faces glowing in the warm light, telling stories of the old world beneath the waves. Mu was not lost, they would say. It only sleeps below. Sometimes, when the moon is high, you can see its lights breathing through the water. The youngest would gaze out to sea, eyes wide, waiting for the glow. And when it came, faint and rhythmic, they would whisper in awe, "The ocean remembers." Liren had long since passed into legend, but her journals, carved upon shells and sealed in coral resin, remained in the Temple of Echoes, a small sanctuary built atop the cliffs of Luma. Within those pages were songs, diagrams of stars, stories of coral that grew from music, and the prophecy she had written with her final breath. There will come a day when we sail again, not to escape the sea, but to greet its memory. The ocean that took us will give us paths, and we will find our own reflections waiting. Those words became a calling. The first to answer it was Nail, a descendant of the original survivors, a dreamer born with the same listening heart as Liren. He spent long nights upon the cliffs, watching the horizon, his ear tuned to the deep hum that rose from below. The sea still sang, though faintly, in a tone like distant thunder. He could feel it vibrate in his chest, the same pulse that had once guided the dream architects of Mu. He believed it was an invitation. "The ocean wants to be mapped again," he told the Council of Elders, "not with ink or compass, but with song." And so, with quiet blessing, he began to build. The new vessels were unlike any that had ever sailed. Their hulls were carved from drift coral, hardened by sun and salt. Their sails were woven from kelp fibre that shimmered with blue-green light at dusk. Each ship carried a core of glowing crystal, a gift said to have been born from the last flicker of the Anai flame. When completed, they did not creak or groan like wood. but sang, low, resonant notes that changed with the wind and tide. The people called them the harmonic fleet. As the first ship was pushed into the water, Nail whispered a prayer. May the sea remember our names kindly. Then he raised the sail, and the voyage began. They followed the whispers of the current, invisible paths that the ocean itself seemed to draw for them. The water was calm, yet alive with unseen guidance. At night, they navigated by the stars, though the constellations were not quite the same as in Liren's time. Some had shifted, others vanished. Yet the heavens still trembled faintly, as if echoing the sea's slow heartbeat. Each dawn revealed new islands rising from mist, small, untouched, radiant with life. They were like fragments of the old world resurfacing one by one. The voyagers made landfall upon many of them. On each, they left a mark, not of conquest, but of remembrance. On one island, they built stone circles that sang when wind passed through them. On another, they taught the people how to read the ocean's hum by placing their hands upon coral. On a third, they carved spirals into rock, the same spirals that had once adorned Mu's temples. And everywhere they went, they sang the same refrain. The tide remembers what the stars forget. The locals listened, not fully understanding, but feeling something stir deep within. A familiarity, like hearing a lullaby from before birth. Years became decades. The voyages of Luma scattered across the wide ocean, following the glowing currents that seemed to know their course before they did. Some settled among new peoples, blending stories and songs. Some vanished, sailing beyond the horizon, their ships swallowed by light instead of shadow. And in every direction, whispers of a vanished homeland began to take root. Tales of a shining continent swallowed by the sea, of temples that glowed beneath the waves, of a civilization that spoke with the stars. Each island told the story differently, but the heart was the same. There had once been a place where land and ocean were one. Nail grew old beneath an endless sky. He sailed until the day his hair turned white and his hands trembled when he raised the sail. Yet even then, the sea remained his companion. One twilight, as his ship drifted near an unfamiliar shore, he saw something remarkable. Faint lights beneath the surface arranged in spirals, just as Liren had described. He smiled through his tears. You never forgot us. That night, he sang a final song to the ocean, his voice carried on the wind. When morning came, his ship floated empty. But along the coastline of that island, new coral had grown overnight. Pale gold, glowing softly in the dawn. The people called it Nail's lantern, and they sang his melody each year when the sea turned warm, believing it guided souls safely home. Centuries would pass. The voyagers' descendants became many peoples, scattered across the great blue expanse. They built new homes on distant islands, in Polynesia, in the far archipelagos of the Pacific, even upon the shores of continents yet unborn. Their languages changed, their gods took new names, but their myths all carried a single echo of a great land that had vanished beneath the sea and of ancestors who listened to the ocean's voice. Stone temples carved with spirals, songs that spoke of stars falling into water, stories of luminous beings who taught harmony to humankind. The world remembered Mu, even when its name was forgotten. On still nights, when the moon rose full over the Pacific, the water would shimmer faintly, as though stirred by an unseen hand. Fishermen said it was the ocean breathing. Elders said it was the song of the first home. And the children, looking out at the glowing sea, would ask, "Is it true that people once lived beneath the water?" The elders would smile and answer softly, "No, child. The water lives within us." The ocean carried the story onward, from island to island, from wave to wave, until it became part of the world's dream. And somewhere deep below, among coral towers, sleeping in eternal light, the city of Mu listened still, its walls glowing faintly whenever a song rose over the sea. The memory had never faded. It had simply travelled across the islands of memory. The sea never forgets, even when the world above has changed 1,000 times. When empires rise and crumble, when languages shift like sand, the ocean keeps its silence. Yet beneath that calm, it waits, patient as breath, holding the weight of everything it has ever known. And sometimes, when the surface world grows quiet enough, it speaks again. Thousands of years had passed since Mu slipped beneath the waves. The descendants of its survivors had scattered across continents, their songs becoming myths, their symbols becoming signs etched into the stone of later civilizations. But the memory of Mu did not die. It lingered, in the shape of a spiral carved into temple walls in distant lands, in the alignment of ancient cities with long-forgotten stars, in the rhythm of chants that rose and fell with the sound of waves. And across ages, a few souls, dreamers, seekers, scholars, began to notice the pattern. In a vast desert far from any shore, an old monk named Taran studied the stars. Each night he climbed to the roof of his monastery and traced their paths with trembling fingers. He saw how constellations shifted ever so slightly each year, how they drifted, as if remembering some long-forgotten harmony. In his journals, he wrote, "The heavens move like the ocean. Perhaps the sky too has tides." No one understood what he meant, but his words spread quietly through generations of wanderers, those who listened to both sky and sea. In another time, far away, an island navigator named Hanno spoke of voices that guided him through fog. When asked how he found his way without compass or map, he touched his chest and said, "The sea hums within me. If I listen, it tells me where to go." Elders dismissed him as mad, until one evening, under a blood-red sunset, he led his people safely through a storm by following a deep vibration only he could hear. Afterward, he told them, "The ocean remembers. I only followed its dream." They began to carve spirals on their canoes after that, small, simple designs that glowed faintly when wet. Centuries later, a traveller named Eleni wandered the ruins of a drowned temple near the coast of a land now called Yavari. The water had receded just enough to reveal great blocks of coral stone, each marked with delicate flowing symbols. The locals avoided the place, calling it the City of Ghostlight. But Eleni felt drawn to it, especially at dusk, when the setting sun struck the water and the carvings shone faintly beneath the ripples. She knelt and pressed her hand to one of the stones. A faint hum rose beneath her palm, low, musical, like the echo of a voice too old to name. She closed her eyes and saw flashes, towers of light, waves, songs without words. When she wrote of it later, she said, "The stones are not dead. They breathe. Somewhere beneath us, the ocean still dreams." By the time of the early scholars, philosophers, sailors, and mystics, the myth of a lost world beneath the Pacific had already taken many names. The Greeks spoke of Atlantis, a paradise swallowed by pride. The sages of India told of Lemuria, the land of the first dawn. The storytellers of the islands spoke softly of Mu, a word carried on the wind, meaning silence or origin, depending on who you asked. Each legend was different, yet each spoke of the same truth. There had once been a place where humankind lived in harmony with the sea, until memory, like tide, receded. And in every telling, the ocean was not the destroyer, but the keeper. In a small library on the western coast of a new empire, an aged historian named Callan collected these stories. His shelves overflowed with maps, charts, fragments of shells, and scrolls that bore the marks of distant civilizations. He spent his life tracing coincidences, patterns between myths of far-flung peoples who could not have known each other. When others mocked him, he only smiled and said, "Truth leaves echoes." One winter, while examining a coral shard brought from the South Seas, he noticed faint carvings along its surface, spirals arranged in a sequence that matched symbols found on temples halfway across the world. He dipped the shard in water, and for a moment, it glowed. He wrote in his journal that night, "There was once a language of light, spoken not in words but in resonance. The ocean remembers it still." Over time, these fragments of remembrance drew others. Artists painted oceans that glowed from beneath. Poets wrote verses about cities sleeping in the deep. Explorers searched the sea for islands that moved like living things. They did not find Mu, not in the way they expected, but the search itself was the answer. For each who listened deeply enough found the same thing Liran had known. The memory of Mu was not in the water alone. It was in the rhythm of the heart, in the breath, in the quiet between waves. One night, centuries apart from any witness, lightning illuminated a storm over the Pacific. For a few heartbeats, the ocean below shone like glass. And deep beneath the light, something stirred, faint, radiant outlines of coral towers, still intact, glimmering softly as if in greeting. The storm passed, and the sea grew dark again. But somewhere in that darkness, the old hum returned, slow, vast, and steady. Those attuned to silence felt it, a vibration running through the earth, through their bones, through the dreams of humankind. Some called it imagination, some called it myth, others simply called it remembering. And so, the scholars continued to listen. They studied the deep currents, the migrations of birds, the geometry of forgotten monuments. The more they learned, the more they felt a pattern, a pulse of design that linked every wave, every stone, every star. They began to understand that the world was not built once, but built again and again, each time rising from the same tide of memory. When they spoke of this among themselves, they whispered another name for Mu. The first harmony. In the end, it was not proof that endured, but longing. The certainty that somewhere beneath the surface, the world that once sang still listened, waiting for humanity to sing again. For even after millennia of silence, the ocean continued to breathe softly against every shore, as if whispering to those who paused long enough to hear, "You have not forgotten, you have only to remember." There comes a moment in every age when humanity looks outward for truth and finds only reflection. The scholars who had searched the ocean for Mu began to grow older, their eyes dimmed by salt and sunlight. Their expeditions yielded fragments, coral shards, strange currents, ruins glimpsed beneath waves, but never the shining continent they dreamed of. And so quietly, their search began to turn inward. What if the lost world they sought had never been beneath the sea at all? What if it had been within them all along, hidden in memory, in dream, in the deep, luminous corridors of the human mind? The idea began with a philosopher named Ilarin, who spent his life studying the link between water and thought. He wrote that the mind, like the ocean, moves in currents and tides, that beneath consciousness lies an endless depth where forgotten civilizations might still breathe. When we dream, he said, we dive, and every dive takes us closer to the place before language, the place where the first songs of Mu were sung. His students laughed at first, but many later admitted they had seen the same images in sleep: glowing cities, spiral symbols, oceans filled with light. One of them, a poet named Seller, wrote, "I have never been to the sea, yet each night I wake with salt on my lips." Across the world, in temples and laboratories alike, others began to notice the same strange phenomenon: dreams filled with water. People who had never heard of Mu began to describe visions of luminous towers beneath the sea, of soft voices whispering in unknown tongues, of coral gardens that sang. A scientist studying sleep patterns recorded brainwaves that pulsed in rhythmic patterns identical to ocean tides. He called them the blue frequencies. When he played recordings of the sea to his sleeping subjects, the rhythms synchronized, as though the mind recognized something ancient in the sound. He wrote in his notes, "The ocean is not a metaphor for the subconscious. The ocean is the subconscious." In hidden monasteries, mystics spoke of the inner Mu, a realm of memory that all souls share. They taught that every thought, every emotion, creates ripples in the collective sea of consciousness, and that somewhere within those ripples, the echo of the first harmony still vibrates. Their meditations were simple: sitting in silence, listening to the breath, until the heartbeat slowed enough to match the pulse of the sea. When students emerged from these trances, many wept quietly. They said they had heard the same whisper, the same low voice that once called to Lyran beneath the waves. It said, "Remember what you are." In time, even skeptics began to wonder, not because of evidence, but because of longing. Every culture on Earth carried some trace of the ocean's dream: songs that mimicked waves, prayers for safe return, stories of floods and rebirth. Every human being, from the first breath to the last, lived in rhythm with tides unseen, the beating of the heart, the ebb and flow of thought. Perhaps memory itself was the true continent, vast and submerged. Aruan had once said that balance is not silence, but the space between songs. Now, modern seekers echoed his wisdom. Artists painted oceans inside the human skull. Poets compared neurons to coral reefs, growing and glowing with thought. Philosophers spoke of the inner Pacific, the shared ocean within the human race, connecting all who dream. And through it all, the same quiet intuition rose again and again. If the memory of Mu lived anywhere, it was here, in the deep water of the soul. In a small coastal town, an old woman named Marin spent her evenings walking the shoreline. She was no scholar, but she had always felt that the sea listened to her thoughts. One night, while watching the tide recede, she knelt and drew a spiral in the wet sand. The pattern was perfect, identical to the ancient symbol found on ruins continents away. She had never seen it before. As she traced it, a sudden stillness filled the air. The waves slowed, the wind paused, and from far across the dark water came a low hum, faint but unmistakable. She smiled through tears. "I remember," she whispered. When morning came, the tide had risen and erased her drawing. But beneath the water, the sand glowed faintly, as if the ocean had copied her mark. Scientists later recorded an unexplained resonance along coastlines across the world, a deep, slow vibration detectable only at great depth. Some thought it was seismic activity, others called it coincidence. But among those who listened carefully, it felt familiar, rhythmic, deliberate, patient. It sounded like a song. They called it the mu tone. When played back through speakers underwater, coral colonies responded by changing colour, pale blue shifting to rose, then to gold. The researchers were astonished. "It's as if the coral remembers," one said. But in truth, the coral had always remembered. It had never forgotten. And in the dreams of people around the world, something beautiful began to happen. They dreamed of the sea again, not in fear, but in longing. They saw luminous shapes beneath the waves, spirals, towers, gardens, and the faint glow of a forgotten city breathing gently in its sleep. Some awoke with salt on their lips, some with tears, some with songs they could not recall upon waking. Yet all carried the same quiet certainty. They had been there before. In the end, it was not discovery that brought Mu back into the human heart. It was memory. The patient tide of remembering rising within each person who paused to listen to silence. No one built a map to find it, because the map was already within them, etched in rhythm, dream, and pulse. When the world grew loud, the memory sank deeper. When the world grew quiet, it rose again. Like breath, like tide, like the whisper beneath the waves. And so the scholars who once measured the stars and charted the seas began to write new maps, not of geography, but of the mind. They charted emotions, dreams, shared visions, each curve of thought resembling the coral spirals once found in Mu. They realized what Lyran had known all along, that memory itself is the ocean, and humanity are its waves. And that perhaps every thought, every love, every song, every grief is simply the sea remembering itself again. Somewhere, far below, the coral towers still glowed faintly, not as monuments of loss, but as symbols of continuity. And above, in the vast ocean of the mind, humankind began to hum back. The song that had once shaped a continent had found a new shore, the heart of the listener, and there in quiet, it would never sink again. The world had grown louder. Cities shimmered with glass and noise. Skies glowed even at midnight, and the hum of machines filled every quiet space once left for thought. Humanity had conquered oceans, mapped stars, and yet, beneath all that brilliance, a soft ache endured. No one could name it. It was the feeling of something remembered, but never seen. Something felt in music, in water, in the hush before dawn. And then slowly, it began again. It started not with discovery, but with dreams. All across the world, people began to dream of the sea, not as travellers or swimmers, but as something deeper, as if they were the water itself. They dreamed of glowing coral fields, of golden towers rising through waves, of hands outstretched toward a light that pulsed like a heart. Children woke speaking of a place under the blue sun. Poets wrote verses that matched ancient symbols no one had taught them. Divers returned from the depths describing songs heard through their breathing masks. Harmonies too structured to be random, too gentle to be threat. It was as though the ocean had begun to whisper again, not through storm, but through human thought. Among those who listened was Dr. Avon Kale, a marine biologist studying coral acoustics off the coast of Polynesia. Late one night, while analysing recordings of underwater frequencies, he noticed a pattern, a soft, rhythmic hum that repeated every 12 hours, perfectly synchronised with lunar tides. When he played it back through speakers, the coral in his lab changed colour, glowing faintly from within. He stood in silence, watching the light ripple through the tank. It pulsed 3 times, pause, then again. Not random, not noise. A message. He whispered to himself. It's still singing. The discovery spread quickly, though few understood it. Musicians sampled the hum and wove it into songs that rose on radio waves across continents. Painters claimed to see light moving through their canvases as though guided by unseen hands. And everywhere, people began to look toward the ocean again, not with conquest, but with longing. A movement began, quiet, wordless, global. They called themselves the Dreamers. They were not prophets or scientists, though some were both. They were listeners, artists, divers, night wanderers, children who drew spirals in sand without knowing why. They gathered on beaches and rooftops, under starlight, near rivers, in city fountains. They closed their eyes and hummed softly, matching the rhythm of waves. At first it seemed like coincidence, a new spiritual fashion, a fleeting trend. But the frequency of their humming was always the same, the mu tone, the deep vibration first recorded centuries before. When thousands sang together, the ocean responded. The tide rose slightly higher. Fish swam in perfect circles. The sea began to glow again. Faint, alive, aware. Dr. Kale joined one of these gatherings on the equinox, standing barefoot at the edge of the Pacific. Hundreds of people lined the shore, their voices blending into one continuous sound. As they sang, he noticed the water trembling, light flickering beneath the surface. It wasn't reflection, it was movement. A shape emerged below, vast spirals of bioluminescent coral, perfectly aligned, swirling outward, as though something deep below had awakened to listen. He felt the vibration in his bones, a resonance both foreign and familiar. He closed his eyes and for a moment saw something beyond time, a world of shining towers, a flame suspended above still water, faces turned towards stars that no longer existed. He felt not fear, but peace, the way a memory feels when finally remembered. When he opened his eyes, the lights were gone. Only the sea remained, calm and infinite. But he knew. He had heard Mu. That same night across the globe, people reported strange phenomena. Tides glowing under new moons. Whales gathering in unheard of numbers, their songs forming complex harmonies. Distant seismic sensors registering soft rhythmic vibrations, as if the planet itself were pulsing to an unseen rhythm. No scientist could explain it, no government could measure it, but every person who heard it, truly heard it, felt the same truth rising inside them. The earth was remembering itself. Artists began to speak openly of receiving visions, paintings of submerged cities and sky mirrored in water. Musicians released albums built entirely on frequencies inaudible to the ear, claiming they were for the ocean to hear. Architects designed buildings shaped like shells, their halls curved to capture and amplify sound. Everywhere a quiet reverence was returning. Humanity, restless and noisy for so long, was beginning to slow down, to listen. Some said it was coincidence, others said it was evolution. The awakening of a memory buried in the human heart since the beginning of time. The dreamers called it the return, and beneath the sea, something stirred. Deep within trenches where no light had touched for eons, coral towers still glowed faintly, their spirals alive with slow golden breath. When the songs above reached them, they brightened, just slightly, as if smiling. Currents changed direction. Plankton drifted in perfect circles, forming patterns no current should allow. The deep ocean exhaled, and for a few moments, every sonar on Earth went silent. The sea had begun to hum again. On a clear morning months later, Dr. Cale sat by the water, watching the sunrise. He had not slept in days. In his mind, he still heard the hum, low, steady, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. A child approached, barefoot, holding a seashell. "Listen," the child said. "It's singing." He smiled, taking the shell and pressing it to his ear. Inside, he heard it. The same tone, deep and endless. He looked out at the sea and whispered, "We hear you." And somewhere, faintly, the waves whispered back. The dreamers continued their gatherings, not to summon, not to worship, but to remember. They understood now that the Song of Mu was not a myth, but a pattern of harmony that all living things once shared. Every tone, every ripple of sound, every heartbeat was a note in the same vast composition, the music of the world itself. And though the ocean no longer glowed as brightly, its voice remained soft and omnipresent, rising with every breath of tide. It was no longer a story of loss, but of reunion. At last, humanity had remembered how to listen. They did not need temples or coral libraries anymore. The temple was the earth itself. The library was memory. The flame burned quietly in every living heart. And though Mu remained beneath the waves, its dream had risen again, carried by every song, every act of kindness, every moment of stillness. The dreamers were not a movement. They were a memory reawakened, and the sea, at last, was at peace. When night fell, and the world grew silent once more, the ocean shimmered faintly under the stars. From horizon to horizon, a single gentle pulse rippled across the water, the sound of the earth breathing in harmony again. And if one listened closely enough, through wind and tide, one could hear the same soft words that had echoed through every age. The tide remembers what the stars forget. Night falls slowly over the world. The tide moves without hurry, breathing against the sand like an old friend, whispering secrets it has told 1,000 times before. The stars drift above, mirrored perfectly in the still surface of the water. Two skies joined by a single reflection, and somewhere, beneath those waves, Mu still glows. Not in ruin, not in grief, but as a memory that never ends. Long ago, it was said that memory is the ocean's truest language, that every sound, every heartbeat, every act of love is carried into its depths, translated into rhythm, and preserved forever. That is why the sea sings when the world grows quiet. That is why we listen. Because in that hum, that soft vibration beneath the noise of life, there is something more than sound. There is continuity. The dreamers still gather, though now their faces are different. Some are children building small spirals in sand. Some are travelers sitting alone by the shore, watching the horizon fade. Some are old souls who have never seen the sea, yet feel it stirring in their chest whenever they close their eyes. They hum without realizing it. They trace spirals without knowing why. They look at the stars and feel for one brief moment that they are being seen in return. Mu is not gone. It has only changed form. From coral and stone into consciousness itself. It has become part of everything that remembers beauty. When you stand at the edge of the ocean and let the waves wash over your feet, you are standing in the oldest memory of all. You are touching what every life before you has touched. You are listening to the same voice that spoke to Lyran, to Aruan, to the priests of light. They have not vanished. They are the tide itself. Their breath moves in the wind that glides over the surface. Their song hides within the whisper of every shell. And when the water recedes, leaving glistening trails upon the shore, that too is a message. Nothing is ever lost. It only changes depth. The ocean teaches patience. It moves slowly, endlessly, untroubled by time. Empires rise and crumble along its edges. Languages bloom and fade. Ships cross it, sink into it, are born from it again. And yet the sea remains, carrying every secret in its quiet pulse. When we look to it, we are looking into the mirror of our own mind, deep, vast, mysterious, and kind. Perhaps that is why so many have searched for Mu. Perhaps they were never seeking a lost continent, but the part of themselves that once belonged wholly to peace. In the depths below, the coral towers of Mu stand unchanged. They glow faintly in eternal twilight, each spire humming with the low, slow rhythm of remembrance. Schools of silver fish drift between the arches, their movements synchronized, as though dancing to an inaudible song. Light seeps down from above, pale threads that twist through the water like falling stars. They catch upon the coral, scattering soft radiance across the ancient streets. There are no ruins there, only transformation. The people of Mu are not ghosts. They are light, folded into the coral, woven into the sea's memory. Every ripple upon the surface, every shimmer of dawn upon the horizon, carries a fragment of their voice. And sometimes, when the moon is full and the world is very still, that voice rises again, faint but unmistakable. It sounds like peace. There is a legend now among the coastal dwellers of the world. They say that if you walk beside the ocean before dawn, when the air is cool and silver, and close your eyes, you will hear a whisper. It will not speak in words, but in rhythm, slow and even, like the heartbeat of the earth. And if you listen closely enough, it will begin to form a pattern, like music half remembered. You will feel warmth spread through your chest, and you will know, not with mind, but with soul, that you are being remembered, because the sea never forgets its children. Dr. Cale, the last of the dreamers from the modern age, once wrote in his journal, "When I listen to the ocean now, I no longer hear distance. I hear proximity. I hear home." He died beside the sea, sitting on a weathered rock, his notebook still open to a page filled with sketches of spirals and stars. The tide rose gently around him, and the water carried his pages away one by one, until only the faint ink marks shimmered beneath the ripples. By nightfall, the words had dissolved, but the meaning remained, suspended in the salt and current, carried to every shore. Even now, when researchers play recordings of the ocean's hum, they sometimes detect a faint pulse, a sequence of tones almost human, repeating with each wave. We remember, we remember, we remember. Every ending returns to silence, but silence is not absence. It is the beginning of listening. And when one listens long enough, one begins to feel that all things, stars, seas, minds, and memories, are part of a single breathing organism. That perhaps all existence is simply the universe remembering itself. That maybe Mu was never just a place, but the moment the cosmos became aware of its own song, the world has moved far from the age of coral and flame. Yet the symbols remain. Spirals appear in galaxies and hurricanes, in seashells and fingerprints. The same geometry that shaped Mu shapes us. Every spiral is a story of expansion and return, of the outward journey and the inward remembrance. It is the signature of everything alive. To draw one in sand is to call the ocean by its oldest name. And so, the song continues. A fisherman hums as he mends his net, unaware that his melody mirrors the tones of the ancient priests. A child draws swirls in the foam left behind by a receding wave. A scientist stares at data from the ocean floor and sees patterns too symmetrical to be chance. A poet dreams of a city beneath the sea, glowing like the heart of the world. They are all remembering, in their own way. The dream of Mu is no longer hidden. It flows quietly through every act of creation, every kindness, every moment of awe before the beauty of water and light. Because the true continent of Mu was never beneath us. It was always within us. If you stand by the shore tonight, wherever you are, and let the rhythm of the tide steady your breath, you might feel it too. The faint hum beneath the air, the warmth in the wind, the pull in your heart that feels older than your name. That is the sea remembering you. That is Mu breathing through you. And if you close your eyes, the stars above and their reflections below will blur into one, until there is no separation between heaven, ocean, and soul. In that moment, there is no past, no myth, no distance, only the gentle truth that everything, land, sea, light, and mind, belongs to the same eternal song. And as the waves wash in and out, endlessly rewriting the edge of the world, you will hear it, soft, patient, familiar. The tide remembers what the stars forget. Now the night deepens. The horizon fades into silver. The last voices of the wind settle into stillness. It is time to rest, time to let the sea hold the story once more. For the song of Mu does not end here. It continues in every ripple, in every dream, in every quiet heartbeat of the world. It continues in you. So breathe with the ocean. Let the waves carry you. And as you drift into the eternal calm, remember. The sea never forgets, and you are part of its remembering.